Joining us now during what is certainly one of the most extraordinary periods in recent American history, the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence. Mr. Vice President, we appreciate you being here.
Thank you,
give us a sense of what you are hearing from the African-American community.
Well, Lou, it was my privilege to travel to Maryland to Bishop Jackson's church to meet with pastors and community leaders. We've also convened conversations here at the White House with African-American leaders, as well as those in law enforcement. And what we consistently hear is, first and foremost, people want law and order on our streets. We really think there's ways that listening to law enforcement, listening to community leaders, we can advance improvements and reforms. But the contrast between what the president has done, putting law and order first, listening to law enforcement, listening to leaders in communities, looking for ways we can improve people's lives, with the radical agenda that the Democratic Party has embraced of defunding the police is truly remarkable. And I can't help but believe that tens of millions of Americans see all of this as a part of the ongoing march of the radical left to take greater and greater control of the Democratic Party.
It is interesting to me that the most recent study, polling on community approval of police departments, shows 72% of Americans approve of their local police department. 72%. This also looks like a serious miscalculation, once again, by the radical Dems, who now seem to be in absolute control of the Democratic Party. And certainly a very strong problem for Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, who have to contend with with former Vice President Joe Biden leading their ticket into November.
Well, that's right, Lou. And now you even have some Democratic leaders that are starting to back away from the call of their most radical supporters on the left calling to defund the police. But even Joe Biden said that he would be willing to withhold federal funds from cities if they didn't otherwise comply with the new dictates. Look, President Trump brought together law enforcement officials. We've been listening to African-American leaders here at the White House and in my travels. And what this president's prepared to do is what he's done all along, and that is advance policies that will ensure the safety of every American family in every community, and also the prosperity. And we understand that the wellspring of our prosperity is safe and secure streets. And what we saw over the last 3 years before the tragic death of George Floyd sent our nation into the last 2 weeks of protests was that violent crime was declining all around the country. We'd seen the lowest unemployment rate ever recorded for African Americans. This president actually advanced legislation with Senator Scott to create opportunity zones. Now, thousands of opportunity zones have been launched in cities around the country, generating more than $100 billion in capital investment to create new jobs. And also, this is a president who has been a champion of a cause that African Americans have supported in overwhelming numbers for decades. He's been a supporter of giving parents the right to choose where their children go to school, whether it's public, private, parochial school. And we're going to continue to move forward in a way that puts law and order first. We're going to listen to law enforcement and to community leaders about constructive changes that we can advance and support in public safety. But we're not going to stop there, Lou. I mean, the truth is the Democratic Party has failed much of the African-American community for generations in this country. Many of our African-American families live in our inner cities that have the worst schools, the most unsafe streets, and they've experienced the very worst effects of that.
I think that I would like to add to the list that you have just expressed. This administration has done more for African Americans in this country than any other administration in 50 years. It has achieved the lowest unemployment rate for African Americans in the country's history. Unprecedented funding for historic black colleges and universities, right. Justice reform. I think the listening, if I may say, and I know that there is certainly a temptation, is to be one way at this point, and I applaud you and the president for listening, and certainly think the country will be stronger for it. But I think that also has to be mutual and reciprocal. It has to be a communication across the country, and I think every American should be listening to what you and this president have accomplished, because it's extraordinary. And to see the Democratic leadership that have done nothing but oppose President Trump, Vice President Pence, and your administration kneeling in the Capitol as they are subservient to what? To whom? Americans don't kneel, and Americans don't demand that others kneel. It is an extraordinary, gut-wrenching moment in this country's history to see this kind of pandering and sickening display of absolute cowardice, and, as you say, devoid of ideas and achievement for the very people whose votes they take for granted. Your thoughts?
Well, I look at the contrast with what you've seen by Democrat leaders at the national and the local level. This president has been very stark, not just on policy, but because in President Donald Trump, you have a leader who is standing with law enforcement, standing with peaceful protesters, standing with African American families who want law and order on their streets. They want better schools. They want more jobs and more opportunities, and President Trump has been delivering that, and we're going to continue to deliver that. We think we have an opportunity here. We've been in discussions with law enforcement and with leaders in the African American community. We think we have an opportunity here to improve law enforcement. We heard that at the White House in that roundtable earlier this week, and the willingness that we heard of law enforcement officers from around the country, states, attorney generals, to find ways that we can strengthen law enforcement in this country, build public confidence in law enforcement. It's all there, Lou, and we're going to do that. But the most important thing is that we don't stop there. What I've consistently heard from African American leaders is that while we were all horrified by what we saw in the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, that it struck a nerve that we believe is much deeper. It goes into the issues that have beset the African American community for generations in cities that have been run by Democrats in liberal Democrat policies for 50 years, and they've failed to bring public safety. They've failed to bring jobs and opportunity. They've failed to bring safe and successful schools to our African American families. We're committed to seize this moment and not just find ways that we're working with law enforcement and community leaders to improve law enforcement, but we want to improve the lives of African American families in every city in this country, just as President Trump has been doing, as you said, every step of the way with record unemployment, opportunity zones, educational choice, that criminal justice reform, and a whole range of issues that we're in the process of achieving real results, which is what we're about at this White House.